Hello. Thank you for being here this morning. I am Rhett Power from Inc. Not Inc., actually, Forbes.com. And it's good to be with you here today. I've got James Gross from Variance. And we're going to talk about letting the product speak for itself and what the difference between starting a company today is versus 10 years ago. And what are some of the new tools that startups that can launch, how they can launch a business, and some of the new tools out there for that, and what product-led growth is. We're going to talk about that today. So, James, I want to ask you, what is, in your view, what does letting a product speak for itself mean? When we wrote that description, what were you really thinking?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me, Web Summit. Thanks for being here as well, Rhett.
Yeah.
In terms of, I think, the biggest transition that I've seen in the last 10 years, as being an entrepreneur, building a software company in 2011 and now starting one in 2021, the tooling that is now in place that allows you basically to understand how your customer is using your product is fascinating, to say the least. I think this is as big of a transition for software companies as moving from on-prem to the cloud was. And so letting the product speak for itself is really all about this idea that now you can start a company today, you can be an entrepreneur, you can build something, you can put it out in the wild, and you can immediately see if people get value out of that. Just 10 years ago, you could have an idea, you could build a product, but it was very hard to actually get any feedback on that product. Oftentimes, maybe a venture capitalist would push you to sell that to bigger companies. In order to sell that to bigger companies, you would have to go through an arduous and long sales cycle. Right. You would then have to go through potentially an implementation cycle. You could be 2 years until you found out if anyone actually is using your product inside that organization.
Right.
That world is basically gone as of now, and I think that's a fantastic thing for for everyone building software and for all the aspiring entrepreneurs that are out there.
So let's dig into that a little bit, a little deeper. You started a company in 2011.
Yep.
And what's the difference between when you started there and you sold, and I think you sold in 2014?
The company?
Yeah.
2019.
2019. What's the difference between starting then and what you're doing now with Variant?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a lot. So in 2011, we started a company called Percolate. It was a marketing technology company out of New York City. I'd say the first thing you had to understand to raise money, to raise a seed round as a first-time entrepreneur, you basically needed a pretty good inkling of product market fit, meaning you really needed to have some sort of a sign of actually having revenue. And in order to get that revenue, though, of course, you had to go out and sell, which often took time. So I think the first thing that was the biggest difference is you had to basically invest in yourself and fund your own company for at least a year, I think. So that was a huge struggle for someone that didn't have any money and had no capital to their name. The next thing that's different back then than now is oftentimes venture capitalists would be looking for bigger logos. They'd be wanting you to show that you can actually sell into enterprise companies, right. Which again, going back to what I said before, just meant oftentimes you had longer sales cycles and things like that.
Right.
And then finally, just like in 2011, you did have the dawn of AWS, and you had really good distribution channels coming of age like Facebook. Right. But you didn't have the level of internal technology that you have now with product analytics, with the ability to tech touch and automate with prospects and customers. And so you really just were kind of building in the void is how I describe it, which is incredibly hard to do, and it can shake your team's confidence, and it means from a sales perspective, you're also just sort of selling and moving on, because it's really hard to understand if that customer is getting value, and ultimately you're just trying to get new revenue in the door.
So how do you, that begs the question for me, with data, all the data that you have now, what kind of tools do you use to get the data, and then how do you use it, and how do you, because I think a lot of companies struggle with how much data they're getting and how to sort of deploy that data and put it into the sales process.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
Sure. So Well, again, the newer, I'll speak to the newer tool stacks. Clearly, there's a lot of different tooling that people could have, but I mean, one of the most amazing inventions over the last 10 years has been sort of how data warehousing has moved to the cloud, right? So probably the company we hear the most about is Snowflake, and the ability to sort of transform and actually have your data in something like a warehouse is incredible. Then there are companies like Segment. Segment was recently acquired by Twilio. Segment acts as a customer data platform, and so from whether all your data is in potentially a warehouse, now you have something like a Segment where you can basically see in real time all the events coming off of your product and off of your website, and of course down to the actual user level of like, this is Rhett is with Forbes, and I can see everything Rhett has done inside my product or on my website. Right. And then from there, of course, moving from a CDP, you increasingly have the ability to transform that data into maybe your CRM system, a Salesforce or a HubSpot, or actually get it into more collaborative channels with the dawn of Slack and Teams, which I really see today. I see Slack and Teams, more Slack as an entrepreneur. I'm much more familiar with it. But it's sort of the modern day sales browser in that you kind of can be in there with your team, you can collaborate, and you can have all your other internal systems actually working with them. So yeah, I think the biggest difference from 2011 to 2021 would be the warehouse, the CDP, and the ability that you can actually stream this data into places that you couldn't get it before. And finally, I would say being able to do it, being able to give it to more go-to-market team members, so non-technical people that don't have to transform this data like by understanding SQL. It's sort of all these no-code solutions that allow them to move the data around and operationalize, work in operational roles with it.
As a CEO, how do you, because there's so many new tools, how do you stay on top of it, and this is sort of a personal question.
Yeah.
How do you stay on top of it, and how do you know what tools are going to be really useful for your company? Because there's so many things to look at and to evaluate. How do you stay on top of the technology and evaluate a product, whether that's going to work for you?
I think part of it is just the way you survive. These newer tools can make you run a lot faster. And so if you're, as a CEO, if you're interested in running faster and you want to run faster with your team, I think it behooves you to really have a good sense of what's out there and what does the stack offer. If you're sitting back and with some older technology, it can really slow you down, which is, I know, maybe pretty unfortunate, but I do think it's the case. Like and since I built my first company, we have lived through this Cambrian explosion of companies that are fascinating. They're amazing. And so I look back and think, wow, how did we build the company back then? With and of course people build companies way before that. But it's fun to stay on top of it because it really can benefit you. It can be a strategic advantage.
Talk about a little bit about product-led growth. Explain that.
Sure, yeah. So I'd just be curious how many people have heard of the term product-led growth out there?
Got a few hands.
Okay, yeah, not a ton. Product-led growth, you might hear by the acronym PLG, is this idea of putting the product at the center of the go-to-market process. Okay. So for your sales and marketing and success teams, the non-product team, actually running your entire sales motion with the product in mind. So that might mean for the marketer that now you're still driving leads, but you're driving leads to a free sign-up, a trial experience, something where the customer can immediately start to use the product. And then from there, of course, sales and marketing, depending on how you might have traditionally done a qualification process, they can also use the product to understand, is this a product qualified lead? So in the traditional software world, you might have a marketing qualified lead that would then get passed over to a sales qualified lead. Now it's a product qualified lead. So let's not ask the marketer to qualify or the salesperson. Let's understand what are the things that we know that customer needs to do in the product to know whether or not they're going to be successful. And then from there, of course, being able to convert that customer, which again, for a lot of modern day companies, and again, a very big difference from 10 years ago, what I like to say is your first deal is most likely your smallest with that customer. Where back in the day, we used to sell a customer, a big company, you'd pain funnel them, you'd go through strategic selling, and then you'd finally win a big deal, and everyone would hooray around the table. Now you can win the customer effectively almost immediately if they become a customer by logging in and using your product, but then your entire journey is to grow that customer, because basically your total addressable market with that customer is as big as your product is today, and then as big as the product you can dream of in the future that ideally you're of course building to solve this customer's pain. And so that is product-led growth. So I think the best companies out there that do product-led growth offer a frictionless trial experience. So I come to the website, I'm able to use the product, and they offer transparent pricing in some way. So I'm getting into this product, I'm using it, and I have a good sense of like what this might cost me to start and where it might need to go. And you'll hear a lot of pushback on PLG that, oh, that's great for companies that target SMB and mid-market. I think that's really misguided. I think this is, and I brought up Snowflake earlier. Snowflake sells to the largest companies in the world. If you work at the largest company in the world, you can go on Snowflake's website and sign up with a credit card today and start using it. The idea of product-led growth, I believe, will matriculate through every go-to-market motion, every company, and increasingly, as every company is a software company, every company, I think, is going to have to put the product at the center of their sales motion.
Are there some examples of companies that are using this approach today?
Yeah, there's tons of examples, and we actually try to index this at Variance a little bit. But yeah, so just this past couple weeks, companies like Freshworks that just went public, companies like GitLab that just went public, incredible product-led growth companies. Public companies that are product-led could be companies like Twilio that I mentioned earlier, and then some of the biggest private companies in the world. Stripe is an incredible product-led company as an example, and that's a good point as well, Rhett. Like this is not just technical products or developer products. Again, it's basically all kinds of products.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your current company, Variance. What do you do? Talk about the company a little bit and your journey to get there to your second company after an exit. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So we started Variance at the beginning of this year, 2021, so it's been about 10 months now. And Variance comes out of really my co-founder and I, Noah, we started Percolate together. And around 2016 or so at Percolate, we were probably about $40 million in annual recurring revenue. The business was growing, but there was really, the challenge was we were in incredibly long sales cycles, right? You have hundreds of sellers, and they're selling to big companies, and the sales cycles can be 6 to 9 months long, and the implementation cycles, getting the customer going, can be 6 to 9 months long. And so I was very, very concerned about this idea that we could start a relationship with someone and we wouldn't know until 18 months later if that was going to be successful. There's an incredible amount of cost that go into supporting the deal, paying the commissions, getting the customer up and running, and then in 18 months, what if this doesn't work out for the customer? What if it doesn't work out for us though? What if there's not a good customer for the product potentially? Right. And so we started to look at, okay, product-led growth was even a term back then a little bit, but not nearly what it is now. And we started to look at how can we get more of our product data to our sales team. And what we found is it just wasn't readily available. The technologies, other technologies like I mentioned earlier, the CDPs, the warehousing, the DBT, how you transform that data, all these companies are new. And so after we sold Percolate, I became obsessed as a CEO, but also as a sales leader, with this idea that the company I want to build in the future is the company that enables amazing sellers, amazing go-to-market teams with product data. I think that's going to make them better sellers, and I think it's going to make the company run better. And I think it's going to be better for the customers that are, of course, you can look at any study on Forbes, and what's the customer saying? I want less friction in the sales process. I want to be able to use your product earlier, kind of get out of my way.
It's got to be easy to implement.
It's got to be easy to implement.
Use, right.
And again, this is not like an anti-sales message. It's just like, it's 2021 and people want a more frictionless experience.
Right.
And so the idea behind Variance is, can we build what I would call a PLG CRM? The traditional CRM model, you think of Salesforce, you think of HubSpot, they revolve around three main objects. You have an account, a contact, and an opportunity. So that's Forbes, Rhett, and I think Rhett is interested in buying something.
Right.
And then ideally in a traditional CRM, I would walk Rhett through my sales stages and then I would close them. And then the CRM thinks we're done. The CRM is like, oh, okay, Forbes is a customer. We don't ever have to talk to them again. Go out there and hunt someone else, seller. When in fact, the sale has just begun when Forbes and Rhett are using my product. And so I need all of that product data in my customer relationship management system to help me as the seller or the success manager, whoever it is, guide you on using, not just you, of course, your company, all the other people on your team, guide them in using the product as seamlessly as possible so I can continually sell to you, ideally until the end of time.
So talk about a little bit about forming or getting your teams to understand this new approach to sales. Has that been a difficult change in approach, in attitude, or getting them to think about this in a different way?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge in the market, right? In many ways, product-led growth is a four-letter word with sales teams. Sales teams hear product-led growth, they think, oh, you're going to automate the sales journey, you're going to take my job away. Not the case, but understandable they might feel that way. And there's certain companies that don't have a lot of sellers. Although there's a lot of data with the companies that go public now that are PLG that have tons of sellers. And so the way we've thought about it, and it really comes down to how I think about going to market as a founder, is don't even fight that battle right now. As an early stage company, the most important thing to us is not to go out and tell people like the way you're working is wrong. You're all going to not make it if you don't go PLG. Our go-to-market is you just start with the founders. So you start with the smallest, the newest companies that are technical, and they've got to start selling. And you say, what do you think the best way to sell is? Or you ask a founder, like, what do you think of a traditional CRM system? And what you'll hear is like, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why would you sell that way? And so it's like, don't. Let's sell this way. So. Clearly I have to fight those battles one day, but as a young company, go where the energy is, go where the people are agreeing with you. So we like to say, we start with founders, understand the founder-led sales journey, we'll help you. As you move and graduate into more of a product-led journey, you're getting more technology in place, you're doing more tech touching, you're doing more automation, we're there for you as well. And then guess what? At some point, you got to scale. And how do you scale? You scale with sellers. You scale with better marketers, you scale with success people. Bring them on. But guess what? They're going to learn everything. You have this entire system in place for you. And then even after that, one last thing, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out here that are in these roles, like customer success is becoming a sales motion too. I increasingly see that, right? And so not only do you build the enterprise sales team, then you get your success-oriented team thinking about, how am I'm not just looking at like the red, yellow, green and thinking like, oh my God, I got to go support this customer. I'm thinking like, how do I take these green accounts and make them, as green as possible?
It almost changes the whole, and we have to wrap up, but it almost changes the whole dynamics of a company, right? Where everybody is involved. You don't just have sales teams anymore. It integrates everybody into that process.
Well, isn't that a lovely thing?
It is.
I mean, in your business, right? You're getting people around a table and getting them aligned. Like, it's crazy that 10 years ago we would start a company and say, you're over here, and you get product data, you don't, and just be happy about it. Like, that's not how we should work as a company.
Indeed. Well, we have to wrap it up, but James, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you.